The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a swarm of insects trapped in glass. Ashley Cooper had been pushing through their particular brand of fluorescent purgatory for 8 months now, and the sound no longer bothered her. What bothered her was the smell, antiseptic layered over stale coffee, and something underneath it all, something that smelled like fear. That one never went away, no matter how long you worked trauma. She adjusted the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the one she touched every morning before her shift, the one that told her story in a language only 18 people in the world could read anymore. The fabric was soft from 1,000 nervous hands over 1,000 nervous days. Her fingers found it the way a compass finds north, automatic, necessary, the only reminder that Captain Ashley Cooper had existed before this hospital, before Atlanta, before the Pentagon erased her name from every official record and handed her a new social security number and told her to disappear. The morning charts were stacked on the desk in Trauma Bay 3 at Seattle General. Ashley moved through them like water, her hand steady despite the small white scars that marked her palms, scars that told their own stories if anyone thought to look. 8 months of double shifts and weekend call, of proving herself competent enough to be invisible, of being so good at her job that the residents forgot she was in the room. That was the goal. Stay useful. Stay quiet. Stay gone. The intercom crackled at 6:16 a.m. Dr. Mercer to grand rounds, Dr. Mercer to grand rounds. Ashley's shoulders tensed. Grand rounds were theater. Dr. Mercer made them into performance art. She finished her notes and headed to the surgical unit, where 23 residents stood in a semicircle around a patient's bed like disciples waiting for scripture. Dr. Mercer arrived with his usual precision, pressed white coat, monogrammed cuffs, the kind of grooming that took money and time and the absolute certainty that you mattered more than everyone else in the room. He was in his mid-50s, with silver hair that looked like it had been brushed with expensive intentions and a smile that never reached his eyes. "This is a study in inadequate assessment protocols," he announced, gesturing toward Mrs. Patterson in bed 4. "And while our nursing staff is well-intentioned, there are limits to what medical professionals without doctoral credentials can reliably observe." Ashley was charting vital signs. She didn't look up. Looking up was the mistake people made. Looking up meant you accepted the role he was casting you in. "Observe Mrs. Patterson's presentation," Dr. Mercer continued, his voice taking on the theatrical cadence he reserved for teaching moments. "A competent surgical nurse, and I do mean a competent one, should have flagged the subtle signs of pneumothorax forming. Instead, our colleague here noted a decreased breath sounds and left it at that." The resident scribbled notes. One of them glanced at Ashley. She kept writing. "This is why we have peer hierarchies in medicine," Dr. Mercer said. "The structure exists for good reason." He turned then, directly toward her, and his eyes held the particular brightness of someone who had found something to wound. "Isn't that right, Cooper?" One measured breath. In through the nose. The kind of breath a Special Forces medic takes before a 12-hour assault in Helmand Province, before the mortars start walking in a line toward your position, before you realize your entire phi base is about to be a grave. "Yes, Dr. Mercer," Ashley said quietly. She did not look up from her charting. A single tear formed at her lower lash line, not from shame, never from shame, but from the sheer accumulated weight of 8 months of this. She wiped it without breaking her focus on the clipboard, without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her face. Her jaw didn't clench. Her voice didn't crack. She simply returned to her work as if he were a weather system passing through, something inevitable and temporary. Dr. Mercer seemed annoyed that she hadn't provided more of a reaction. He lingered for another 3 seconds. Ashley could feel him, sense the air pressure change when he finally turned away, then continued his rounds. The residents dispersed like a flock of birds scattered by a stone. One of them, the thin one with the expensive watch whose name Ashley couldn't remember, muttered something to his colleague as they passed. A laugh. Quick and cruel. She finished her notes at 7:13 a.m. The morning census was light, 14 patients across the trauma unit, 2 in recovery, 1 stable enough to be transferred to the cardiac ward by noon. Standard Tuesday. The kind of day where nothing unusual happened. And then the ambulance radio crackled at 7:51 a.m. Seattle General, this is Mobile 14 inbound with a code yellow. Single vehicle accident, patient male, early 60s, multiple trauma, altered level of consciousness, ETA 8 minutes. Ashley pulled up a trauma bay as the team mobilized. The usual choreography, the nurses moving like dancers in a piece they'd rehearsed 1,000 times, the residents checking supplies, the surgical team standing by. She prepped the central line station and ran through her mental checklist: 14-gauge angiocath needles, saline bags, lactated ringers warming in the rapid infuser unit. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. Mobile 14 arrived with sirens cutting through the morning air like arguments. The double doors burst open, and the paramedics rolled in with the controlled urgency of people who had learned not to panic even when everything was falling apart. The patient was unconscious. Deep laceration across his right temple. Blood soaked through the field dressing. His right leg was bent at an angle that meant serious fracture, probably femur with internal bleeding. His tactical vest was... Ashley stopped breathing. Not a tactical vest. A faded denim jacket with military insignia partially visible despite the blood. And beneath the collar, barely visible, the outline of a unit patch. She knew that patch. She had sewn its twin into her own jacket lining 6 years ago in a training facility that officially didn't exist. On my count, the paramedic said. 1, 2, 3. They transferred him to the gurney. His face turned toward her for a fraction of a second, and she saw the weathered lines of someone who had spent decades in environments that aged a person 10 years for every 5 that passed. The scar tissue on his neck suggested either a close call with an IED or something even worse. His wallet fell from his pocket as they moved him. One of the EMTs bent to pick it up. Master Sergeant James Chen, she read aloud. 14 years on file. 3 purple hearts. The room tilted slightly. Not visibly. Nobody saw it. Ashley had trained herself too well to let the physical world know when the internal one had just cracked open like a fault line. What's his status? Dr. Mercer arrived, already barking orders in that tone that suggested the patient should be grateful for his presence alone. Blunt force trauma to the right temple, femur fracture with probable internal bleeding, altered consciousness, one of the residents reported. Vitals are BP 98/62 and falling, heart rate 116, respiratory rate 22. Get him to CT, Dr. Mercer said. I want imaging on that leg before we do anything else. Ashley moved with the team, hanging blood bags on the rapid transfuser, inserting the central line with the precision of someone whose hands remembered things her mind had been ordered to forget. Master Sergeant Chen. She remembered him, not directly, not from any experience she was supposed to have, but from David's voice on encrypted phone calls 3 years ago. Sarge kept us alive in Kandahar when everything went sideways. Her son's commanding officer. The man who had shepherded her only child through 3 deployments and brought him home whole every time. The unit patch inside her jacket seemed to pulse against her ribs, a second heartbeat keeping time with the monitors, the 4 pumps, the hydraulic whisper of the hospital beds rolling toward imaging. She had been erased by the Pentagon. That was the deal. Her service record deleted, her name changed, her entire existence before 8 months ago converted into a file that no longer existed except in the vault beneath the Pentagon where they kept the operations that hadn't happened and the soldiers who officially weren't. The Black Site mission in Helmand Province, the one that went sideways, the one that required a cover story, the one that meant Captain Ashley Cooper had to disappear, had been compartmentalized so thoroughly that even her own son didn't know she had served. He was alive. She knew that from the phone calls, from the pride in David's voice whenever he mentioned his commanding officer's field craft, his calm under pressure, his absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. And he had just been wheeled into her hospital, bleeding from a stateside car accident, wearing a faded jacket with a unit patch that meant she recognized him as something far more than what the medical system would see. The patient was transferred to CT, and Ashley finished her documentation with hands that didn't shake, with a voice that remained level, with a kind of composure that comes from being trained in 18 different languages of controlled breathing. but her mind was moving through tactical calculations, running probabilities, assessing the situation with the same precision she had learned in an underground facility in Helmand Province that didn't appear on any map. Master Sergeant Chen was in her hospital, and everything she had buried for 6 years was about to surface. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in a sickly white as Ashley restocked the 4th-floor break room vending machine, sliding rows of saltines and protein bars into their slots with methodical precision. She had memorized the angle that prevented jams, the exact pressure needed, the sequence that took 4 minutes and 38 seconds. Precision was muscle memory. Precision was survival. 2 residents rounded the corner, their voices already pitched high with the particular cruelty of the exhausted and entitled. "There she is," the taller one said, his tone sliding into mockery. "The field medic playing Florence Nightingale." Ashley did not turn. Her hand continued its work, sliding another row home. "I heard she questioned Dr. Mercer's consent forms yesterday," the second resident said, louder now, performing for an audience that was just her. "Can you imagine? A floor nurse telling a surgeon how to do his job. What's next? She'll be scrubbing in." The laughter came sharp and fast, designed to wound. They waited, both of them, bodies leaning against the opposite wall. They were waiting to see if she would flinch. Waiting to see if she would defend herself. Waiting to see her crack under the weight of their disdain. Ashley closed the vending machine door. The pneumatic hiss of the seal was the only sound for 3 full seconds. 12 years, she said quietly, turning to face them. Her voice carried the weight of gravel beneath a boot heel. "Combat medic, field medicine, 3 combat tours. I have forgotten more about emergency medicine than either of you will learn in your entire careers." She did not raise her voice. She did not accelerate her words. She simply stated it, the way one states a fact about geography or physics, immutable, final. The residents' expressions flickered. Not quite shame. Not quite respect. Something closer to uncertainty. "That's not what," the taller one began. But Ashley was already walking past them, back to the unit, and the weight of her words hung in the break room air like the antiseptic smell that clung to every surface in this hospital. By late afternoon, Dr. Mercer had orchestrated grand rounds in the teaching auditorium, a white-walled theater with tiered seating where 50 residents and medical students sat in descending rows like an ancient amphitheater of judgment. Ashley stood at the bedside of a 72-year-old patient named Mr. Hendricks, a man with atrial fibrillation and declining kidney function, as Mercer's voice carried through the room with theatrical disappointment. "What we see here is inadequate initial assessment," Mercer announced, gesturing toward the patient's chart with the precision of a conductor. He had positioned Ashley in his line of sight, making sure every student could see her standing there, could see the object lesson. The floor nurse documented vitals but missed the subtle signs of electrolyte imbalance. Classic inadequacy in protocol recognition. The residents exchanged glances. Some looked away. Others held her gaze with the particular intensity of people enjoying a spectacle. "One might think," Mercer continued, his voice dripping with honeyed disappointment, "that someone with field experience would have caught this. But field medicine and hospital medicine require different skill sets. Different standards. Different competence levels. There. The blade, polished and perfect. Different competence levels." The words hung in the auditorium like a diagnosis. Ashley's breathing remained even. One measured inhale through her nose. One slow exhale. Her hands did not tremble. Her eyes did not water. She simply stood there, present, contained, while 50 people watched to see if she would shatter. She did not. 2 hours later, at the shift change, Dr. Mercer cornered her outside the surgical consent area, his expression tightened into something resembling fury. He held a document in his right hand, a surgical consent form for a patient named Mrs. Chen, no relation to the sergeant, Ashley's mind noted with the precision that never turned off, and his voice dropped into the register that meant he had worked himself up to something he considered righteous. "This patient is scheduled for an elective hysterectomy," he said, his words clipped. "And you questioned whether she understood the procedure. You actually told me the consent might not be informed. Ashley had read the form. Mrs. Chen, 61 years old, minimal English, no family present. The surgeon's notes on the form were 3 words: emotional distress, proceed anyway. The phrase that had made Ashley's training, her 12 years in medicine, every instinct honed in field hospitals, all scream that something was wrong. The patient asked what hysterectomy meant. Ashley said quietly. 3 times. In her chart notes, the word hysterectomy was not defined. She does not understand what she is consenting to. Mercer's face deepened to a color approaching crimson. You are a floor nurse. You document vitals. You change bedpans. You do not question surgical judgment. You do not interfere with consent protocols that I have designed. His voice rose. In fact, I am calling security right now. You can explain your insubordination to them. He reached for his radio clip to his coat. Not yet, not quite, but the motion was there. The threat crystallized into action. Ashley took one measured breath. In through her nose. Hold. Out through her mouth, slow and controlled like she had learned in survival training, in interrogation resistance courses, in the moments before operations where hesitation meant death. A single tear escaped her left eye. She did not wipe it immediately. She let it sit there, visible, and then, with deliberate slowness, she raised her hand and pressed her palm against her cheek, wiping it away without breaking eye contact. When she spoke, her voice emerged flat and steady as surgical steel. I have seen what happens to men who mistake silence for weakness. The words landed in the space between them like a scalpel on tile. Not a threat. Not a plea. A statement of fact delivered by someone who had seen men far more dangerous than this one, had looked into the eyes of people who would have crushed him without hesitation, had held dying soldiers in her arms while artillery fire shook the ground beneath her knees. Mercer's hand froze on the radio. Ashley did not wait for his response. She simply turned and walked back to the nursing station, her spine straight, her pace measured, her breathing steady. Behind her, she heard him lower his hand. She heard him mutter something under his breath, something about reporting this, but his voice had lost its certainty. As she reached the nursing station, Ashley's mind made the connection that had been forming for 8 months, the pattern her brain had been cataloguing like a spreadsheet of survival. The billing codes. The procedures Dr. Mercer ordered that never appeared in patient charts. Mrs. Chen's hysterectomy, listed at $47,000, when the actual surgical time would cost half that. Mr. Hendrick's cardiology consult, billed to 3 insurance companies simultaneously. The phantom procedures. The inflated charges. The codes that existed in the billing system but nowhere in the medical record. He did not want her gone because she questioned his surgical judgment. He wanted her gone because she documented everything. Her charting was meticulous, precise, compulsive in its accuracy, the habits of a person trained to leave no margin for error when lives hung in the balance. And that meticulous documentation would, eventually, expose the pattern. The billing fraud. The kickbacks. The systematic theft that had funded whatever life he lived outside these walls, the lake house, the private schools, the mythology of a successful surgeon. She was a threat not to his ego but to his income. Ashley logged into the patient management system and pulled up the record she had been unconsciously collecting for 8 months. There, in plain sight, 73 instances of billing codes that did not match procedures. Charges that exceeded reasonable amounts by factors of 3, 4, sometimes 5. Insurance claims filed for procedures documented in her notes as not performed or cancelled or refused by patient. The room felt colder suddenly, though the temperature had not changed. The fluorescent light seemed to hum at a frequency that made her teeth ache. And that was when the radio crackled at the nursing station. A code announced. Not from this unit. From the emergency department downstairs. Code Blue, Trauma Bay 4. ETA on transport, 3 minutes. The transport arrived at the loading dock at 14:56, the ambulance screaming through Atlanta's afternoon traffic like a banshee warning of what was coming. Master Sergeant Chen lay on the stretcher with his left femur shattered, his pelvis fractured in 3 places, and internal bleeding that had been pooling since the car accident on I-285. The paramedics had done everything by the book: 2 liters of saline, pressure dressing on the visible laceration, oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. The trauma resident, Dr. Paulson, a 28-year-old who'd never lost a patient but also had never really saved one either, was already waiting at Bay 4 with his hands trembling slightly. Ashley heard the alarm first. The mechanical wail of the EKG monitor screaming its flatline song across the cardiac unit. Not the usual rhythm, not the beeping of a stable patient. This was the sound of a body shutting down. She was restocking the supply cart near the nurse's station, her hands methodical, her mind already 3 steps ahead the way field medicine had taught her to think. Pain was information. Pain was data. A flat line was data telling you that every second now cost a life. She moved. The crash cart was already rolling toward Bay 4, but the surgical resident stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The monitor was showing complete cardiac collapse. The blood pressure cuff cycled automatically and screamed, systolic pressure undetectable. Ashley's eyes caught his for exactly 1 second. That was all the assessment she needed. He wasn't going to move. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold a syringe. His voice, when he finally spoke, cracked like a teenager's. We need to. Paulson's voice dissolved into nothing. Ashley was already in the bay. The crash cart seat had her badge clipped to the pocket. Her trauma shears hung from her neck lanyard. She could smell the antiseptic and something else, fear, sharp and copper-edged, coming off the surgical resident. Chen's chest rose and fell 3 times on the ventilator, each breath mechanical, lifeless, his body doing the work that his heart had abandoned. "Get me a 18-gauge needle," Ashley said. Not a request. Not a question. The tone of someone who'd given orders in a combat hospital where seconds equaled survival and hesitation meant body bags. A nurse, Martinez, 3 years out of nursing school, had never worked a true trauma, handed her the needle with the reflexive obedience of someone who recognized authority when they heard it. Ashley felt the 2nd and 3rd intercostal spaces, her fingers reading the anatomy like braille. The needle went in at the midclavicular line, perpendicular to the ribcage. The hiss of air escaping told her she'd hit the pneumothorax. Tension pneumothorax. A collapsed lung pressing against the heart, squeezing it like a fist. That's why he was flat-lined. The monitor changed. Not dramatically. Not like television. Just a single blip that became 2 blips that became a fragile rhythm beginning to reassert itself. "Pressure's coming up," Martinez whispered. But Ashley was already moving. She knew what came next. Tension pneumothorax would respond temporarily to needle decompression, but Chen needed a chest tube, and he needed it now. His O2 sat was dropping, the monitor showed 62. The blood pressure was still critical. 68 systolic. "I need a chest tube tray." 28 French. Now. Ashley's voice had dropped an octave. The voice of someone who'd run field operations where talking too loud drew sniper fire. The voice of someone who'd held compression bandages while medevac helicopters fought their way through sandstorms. "Get me 1 milligram epinephrine, push it 4. 2 units of ONEG in the rapid infuser." Paulson watched from the doorway, his hands still shaking. He should have been the one calling orders. He should have been the one running the code. Instead, he was watching a trauma nurse command a resuscitation with the precision of someone performing surgery on a living, breathing human being. She was already prepping the chest wall, her hand steady as stone, finding the 4th intercostal space at the anterior axillary line with her fingertips. The scalpel went in. Ashley made the incision with the economy of motion that came from muscle memory burned into her nervous system by 3 years of combat medicine in Helmand Province. Open the pleural space. Find the lung. Palpate for air leak. 1 motion. 2 motions. The chest tube slid in like it had been waiting for her hands to place it. O2 saturation climbed. 62 became 68 became 75. The monitor showed sinus rhythm stabilizing. 79, his blood pressure responded to the epinephrine, the fluids pushing through the rapid infuser at full pressure. 82, chest rise became symmetrical. Both lungs breathing. 88, the color started returning to his face, from the gray-blue of dying back to the pale tan of critical but viable. 92, stable. Paulson had moved into the bay at some point, but he wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there, watching Ashley work, watching the way she didn't hesitate or second-guess herself, the way her hands moved like they belonged to someone who'd done this not in simulations but in real conditions with real mortality pressing down on every decision. Her movements had changed. Her spine straightened. Her voice, when she spoke next, carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Get me a trauma surgeon. Page cardiothoracic. I want imaging on my command. She was looking at the chest tube she'd just placed. Clear. No frothy blood. This patient needs the OR. Now. Martinez was already on the phone. Paulson finally found his voice. The blood loss, his pelvis, we should stabilize first. The pneumothorax is controlled. His pressure's 95/62 and rising. Cardiothoracic will handle the intrathoracic bleeding. Orthopedics will plex the pelvis. Ashley's eyes met his without apology, without explanation. We run the code now or he codes for real. Your choice. It wasn't a question. It was the way someone spoke who'd already made 100 decisions like this and buried 300 people who couldn't be saved. The surgical resident nodded, and Ashley had already turned back to Chen, her hands checking the tube placement, confirming the breath sounds, verifying the ventilator settings. But that wasn't what made Martinez pause as she was calling down to the surgical floor. It was the moment when Chen's hand, slack on the stretcher, brushed against Ashley's wrist. His sleeve had shifted. For exactly 2 seconds, Martinez saw the tattoo on Ashley's inner forearm, small, faded, but unmistakably military. A Ranger tab above a unit designation. Martinez had seen tattoos like that before. Her father was Army Reserve. You didn't get marks like that unless you'd served. And you didn't get marks like that unless you'd served in a unit that mattered. Ashley felt the brush of contact and her hands never wavered. She simply pulled the sleeve back down with her other hand, already moving to verify the tube site one more time, her focus absolute. Trauma surgery standing by, Martinez said into the phone. ETA to the OR, for minutes. What neither of them knew was that those for minutes would matter more than any of them could have imagined. That the man lying on the stretcher, the Master Sergeant whose life Ashley had just refused to surrender, would be the bridge between the woman Ashley had become and the captain she'd been forced to bury. That somewhere in the Pentagon's classified databases, an alert was already triggering. A code that hadn't been activated in 8 years was just now being typed into a secure terminal. And someone, somewhere, was about to pick up a phone that only rang for emergencies of the highest classification. The doors to the operating theater opened ahead of them. The surgical team was waiting. Ashley handed the chart to the incoming surgeon with a precise clinical summary, vital signs, interventions, time-dependent responses, and stepped back to let the OR team take over. But as Chen disappeared behind those doors, she saw his uniform jacket, the one the paramedics had cut partially away and left on the stretcher. And there, sewn into the inner lining in careful military stitching, was a faded unit patch. Not just any unit patch. The same unit patch that Ashley kept sewn into her own jacket lining. The same one her son David would have worn in the same colors, in the same company, under the same flag. The one that meant Chen had kept her son alive through 3 deployments. The one that meant the Pentagon would call within the hour. Dr. Mercer arrived as the monitor's steady beep announced sinus rhythm. He stood in the doorway of Trauma Bay 3, watching Ashley's hands move with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Her fingers still pressed against Chen's sternum. Her eyes still locked on the monitor. The resident who'd frozen stood against the far wall, face the color of old plaster, shoulders shaking. The attending cardiologist was just walking in, stethoscope already raised, ready to take over the save that had already been made. Mercer's expression shifted. Not to relief. Not to gratitude. To something else entirely. Something that looked like a man watching his carefully constructed house collapse in real time. The room went dead silent. Ashley stepped back from the bed. Chen's chest rose and fell with the ventilator's mechanical rhythm. O2 saturation holding steady at 94%. Blood pressure climbing, 88/56. Not good yet. Not stable. But alive. The kind of alive that shouldn't have been possible 5 minutes ago. Chen's hand moved. His fingers found Ashley's wrist before she could fully step away. His eyes weren't focused. Sedation was already in his full line, midazolam, 2 milligrams, but something cut through the chemical haze. His lips formed a single word. Barely a whisper. Nightingale. Ashley pulled her hand back. Didn't look at his face. Didn't acknowledge what she'd heard. Wrong patient, she said. Her voice was flat. Calm. The voice of someone stating a medical fact. Then she turned and walked past the attending, past the frozen resident, and straight toward Dr. Mercer. He didn't move. He stood in the doorway like he was made of reinforced concrete. His eyes tracked her as she approached. She could see the calculation happening behind them. The recalculation. The desperate arithmetic of a man whose leverage just evaporated. You violated protocol, he said. Not a question. A statement. A beginning. Emergency intubation requires physician clearance. You performed advanced procedures without authorization. Ashley met his gaze. Held it. One measured breath. The patient was exsanguinating. The team was frozen. Sinus rhythm was restored. It wasn't a request. It was a command. His voice had dropped. Dangerous. You're done, Cooper. Badge. Now. She unclipped her hospital badge from her scrubs and placed it in his palm. The plastic was still warm from her body. Mercer's fingers closed around it like he'd just won something. Like this small piece of plastic meant he'd survived the afternoon. He didn't know what was coming. Within 60 minutes, Mercer was in his office making calls that had the quality of a man activating the entire architecture of his power. The hospital board chairman, Gerald Bancroft, retired investment banker with a house on Lake Burton and a 2:07 a.m. golf handicap, was mid-swing when his phone buzzed. Mercer's voice was smooth as olive oil. Gerald, we have a situation with one of the floor nurses. Erratic behavior. Violated surgical protocols in front of 3 residents. We need you to understand the liability before she escalates this. I'll call you back, Bancroft said. His next golf shot went wide by 12 feet. By 7 p.m., Mercer's assistant was on the phone with every reference Ashley had listed on her Seattle General employment application. Mercy General in San Diego. 3 Sisters Medical in Portland. Walter Reed Medical Center in Bethesda. Each conversation was a masterclass in suggestion. Mercer had never mentioned the thoracotomy. Never mentioned the save. Instead, we're conducting a routine review and some of Ms. Cooper's recent decisions have raised concerns. Erratic judgment. Escalating patterns of behavior. We just want to understand if you've observed anything similar during her previous employment. The references said nothing. They had nothing to say. But the silence of people who'd never heard of any issues was different from the silence of people who couldn't say what they knew. By 8:15 p.m., a human resources investigator named Patricia Hollis, 43 years old, 5 published papers on workplace misconduct, contract hourly rate of $385, was sitting in Mercer's office reviewing a file that barely existed. Complaints fabricated from thin air. Incident reports written retroactively. But presented with the confidence of a man who'd done this before. Just get me something by tomorrow morning, Mercer said. Anything grounds for immediate suspension. I want her gone before the night shift ends. Patricia Hollis took her $385 an hour and did what she was paid to do. By midnight, Ashley had a letter informing her that she was suspended pending investigation into violations of medical protocol and conduct unbecoming a Seattle General employee. Effective immediately. Badge surrendered. Access revoked. Do not return to the facility. The words were printed on official letterhead. They were signed by the chief medical officer. They were the kind of words that ended careers. Ashley packed her locker into a cardboard box. 7 months of belongings. Compression socks. A spare scrub top. Hand lotion that smelled like lavender. At the bottom of the locker, wrapped in a clear plastic bag, was the jacket. The one she hadn't worn since before the world knew Captain Ashley Cooper had been erased. Inside the lining, just above where the left shoulder would rest, was the faded unit patch. 75th Ranger Regiment. The colors were almost gone now. The stitching had come loose on one corner. She'd sewn that patch by hand in a forward operating base in Helmand Province in 2009, using a needle and thread from an aid kit while mortar fire shook the walls around her. She held it for a long moment. Then she closed the jacket. Placed it carefully in the box. Taped it shut with medical tape. The irony wasn't lost on her. The diner was called Mel's. It was the kind of place that existed in every American city at 3 a.m., fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps, checkered linoleum floor streaked with the kind of grime that accumulated over decades, coffee that was technically hot but tasted like it had been brewed sometime in the Clinton administration. The waitress had given up trying to make conversation around hour 2. Now she just refilled the cup every time Ashley reached it, which was often. Ashley sat in a booth by the window. The cardboard box with her entire career sat on the seat beside her. Outside, Atlanta's night rain hammered the pavement in sheets. The kind of rain that arrived without warning and seemed personal, like the weather had a grudge. Her coffee had gone cold approximately 47 minutes ago. She knew this because she'd been counting. Small rituals. Small ways to feel like she had control over anything at all. Count the minutes. Count the refills. Count the hours until the sun came up and she had to figure out what the next version of this looked like. In the window's reflection, a hollow-eyed stranger looked back at her. The woman had the bone structure of someone who'd once been formidable. Now she just looked tired. Not physically tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying secrets so heavy they bent your spine. The kind of tired that came from watching everything you'd built get dismantled in the time it took to save someone's life. She'd saved Chen. She'd performed an emergency thoracotomy using a trauma kit scalpel. She'd felt his sternum crack under her hands. She'd felt the blood pool and warm against her palms. She'd felt his heart respond to the epinephrine like it had been waiting for permission to live again. And in saving him, she'd destroyed herself. The patch was in the box. She could feel it there, somehow, even through the cardboard. The one piece of who she really was. The one thing that would prove, if anyone ever asked, that she wasn't just a nurse. That she was a captain. That she'd held a field hospital against a 12-hour Taliban assault. That she'd saved 214 Marines across 3 tours. That the Pentagon had erased her because the operation she'd led in Helmand Province had been classified so deep it didn't officially exist. She thought about throwing the patch away. Just taking it out of that box, walking to the trash can by the restrooms, and dropping it in. Letting it disappear. Letting Captain Ashley Cooper disappear completely. There was freedom in that. There was relief. There was the possibility of being nobody at all. Her hand moved toward the box. Stopped. Held there in the fluorescent light, shaking. Not from fear. From restraint. The kind of restraint that had kept her alive through 3 deployments. The kind that kept soldiers from shooting first and asking questions later. The kind that turned ordinary people into people who could absorb punishment without flinching. She pulled her hand back. Left the box closed. The coffee was undrinkable now. She ordered water. The waitress brought it in a plastic cup with ice that had mostly melted. Ashley drank it anyway. Counted the ice cubes, 12. 12 became 11. 11 became 10. At 3:51 a.m., her phone buzzed for the first time in 7 hours. No caller ID. Just a Seattle area code. She didn't answer. The message that appeared was from a number she'd been told never existed, urgent. Security clearance flagged in background check. Stand by for contact. She stared at it. Read it twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. 30 seconds later, a sound cut through the Atlanta night. Distant at first. Then closer. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of rotor blades breaking the sound barrier. Single aircraft, approaching from the northwest. The kind of bird that didn't land at hospitals. The kind that landed at military bases. The kind that came when the Pentagon decided you were too valuable to disappear after all. Ashley's eyes moved from the phone to the window. From the window back to the box. She watched the reflection of a woman who'd been invisible for so long she'd almost forgotten what visibility felt like. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed. Buzzed again. And then the phone rang. The voice on the other end was military precise. Male. Age somewhere around 55. Captain Cooper. We need you back on base within the hour. A patient you treated at Seattle General has made some statements about his medical history. Statements that have escalated. The situation requires your expertise. I've been suspended, Ashley said. Her voice sounded different than she remembered it. Older. Harder. I'm no longer a nurse. That was never the case, Captain. Your service record shows we gave you a medical discharge in 2014. Classified. But your actual status has been active reserve this entire time. Your name was erased from civilian records, but not from ours. We never stopped having a claim on you. The rain hammered the window. The rotor blades grew louder. Somewhere in the Atlanta night, a UH-60M Black Hawk was descending toward a helipad that could fit a truck. A helipad that existed in every major American city. A place where soldiers and hospital staff weren't supposed to ask questions. What do you need? Ashley asked. The patient. Master Sergeant Chen. He started talking about an operation. A classified operation in Helmand Province. An operation that, officially, never happened. He's been trying to find you. Asking for someone he calls Nightingale 6. And more importantly, he's told the story to 3 Marines, a psychiatrist, and 1 very curious surgeon at Seattle General. Ashley's breath slowed. Deepened. The mask that she'd worn for 9 years, the one that made her just another nurse, shifted. The woman in the window's reflection straightened. The hollow look faded. Something harder took its place. Send the bird, she said. I'll be ready. She hung up. Stood. Took the cardboard box under one arm. Left money on the table, 2 20s, enough to cover the water and the coffee and the company. The waitress nodded from behind the counter. She'd worked the 3 a.m. shift long enough to know when not to ask questions. The rain soaked through Ashley's jacket in the 30 seconds it took her to reach the helipad at the edge of the hospital district. The cardboard box was falling apart. The patch inside it was too important to abandon. The Black Hawk descended through the rain like something from another world. The rotor wash bent the trees horizontal. The rain fell sideways. And Captain Ashley Cooper, nurse, patient, invisible warrior, walked toward it without hesitation. She had no idea what was about to happen next. But she was no longer anyone who needed to wonder. The background check hit the system like a flare shot into black sky. A routine scan for her disciplinary file, nothing more, HR protocol, standard procedure, and suddenly the database lit up. Classified. Compartmentalized. A security clearance that shouldn't exist for a civilian nurse, buried so deep that even the hospital's compliance officer had to call her supervisor 3 times before understanding what she was reading. By 2:38 p.m., Homeland Security servers registered the flag. By 3:06 p.m., the Pentagon knew. By 4:22 p.m., the call was already in motion. Ashley didn't know any of this. She was cleaning out her locker when the administrator's secretary found her, face pale as antiseptic, asking her to come to the conference room. Just routine. Just the board meeting they'd scheduled. Just the final nails in the coffin Dr. Mercer had spent the last 72 hours building. She walked the hallway with her head level, one hand trailing along the cool metal railing, feeling the pulse of the hospital around her, the ventilator wheeze from room for 12, the distant intercom calling a code, the rubber soles of nurses' shoes clicking against tile like a countdown she couldn't hear but could feel in her bones. The conference room was packed. Board members in expensive suits. HR with their tablets and printed documents. Dr. Mercer at the head of the table, cufflinks catching the fluorescent glare, his smile the kind a predator makes when the trap has already sprung. The termination letter was already printed. The recommendation for license review was already signed. All they needed was her resignation, or if not that, then her defeat. The door opened again. Master Sergeant Chen walked in. His arm was still strapped. 3 days post-thoracotomy, no business being anywhere but a bed, but there he was in dress uniform, a dress blue so crisp they could cut, ribbons arranged like a geography of survival, boots that sounded like thunder against the polished floor. He moved past the board members, past Dr. Mercer, straight to Ashley. Leaned down. Whispered into the sudden silence, "Nightingale 6, is that you?" The room held its breath. A Marine Corps liaison in the back of the room stood, holding a single piece of paper. His uniform was immaculate. His voice was made of precision. Captain Ashley Cooper, Silver Star, citation reads, for gallantry in action on June 14, 2009, in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Captain Cooper assumed command of a forward operating base field hospital after the commanding officer was killed in action. For 12 consecutive hours, she provided emergency medical care to wounded Marines under direct enemy fire. Sustained Taliban assault. 217 rounds impacted the structure. She remained at her post. 0 casualties under her watch. He paused. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was reading. That is a Silver Star. A 2-star general stepped forward. His presence made the air pressure change. And before that, he began, but Dr. Mercer was already standing, face flushing from pale to crimson, words spilling out like a dam breaking. This is completely inappropriate. We have established protocols. Proper chain of command. This is a civilian disciplinary matter and I don't appreciate the intrusion of 3 bronze stars, the general said, overriding him like he wasn't speaking at all. Combat medical badge. 2 purple hearts. Each decoration was its own sentence. Each one landed like a judgment. Your service record shows 847 combat medical procedures, Captain. 847 lives you held together when everything was falling apart. A Pentagon official in a charcoal suit moved to the center of the table. His credentials were so classified that half his lanyard was redacted. Captain Cooper has been operating under National Security Directive 5/2007 since her honorable discharge. Her cover, maintained for 14 years, is now compromised in direct consequence of life-saving action. The operation she participated in 2009 was classified at the highest level. She was ordered to disappear. New identity. New social security number. New life. That directive remains in effect. He looked directly at Dr. Mercer. Except now it's void. Because you got her fired and that triggered an automatic Pentagon review. Someone on the board shifted. Pulled out their phone. Typed something. Passed it to the person next to them. A video began circulating around the table. Ashley didn't look, but she heard the audio. Her own voice, Small and careful, thank you, doctors. Dr. Mercer's voice, loud and cruel, playing doctor, aren't we? When did we decide nurses could diagnose? Laughter. Intern laughter. The sound of her being smaller than she was. The video had 2.3 million views. By week's end, an army surgeon, decorated, respected, the kind of name that carried weight across military medicine, had seen that video. Colonel James Whitmore, who'd taught Dr. Mercer surgical technique 23 years ago, who'd written his letters of recommendation, who'd believed in him. The colonel released a statement through the American College of Surgeons. Dr. Mercer does not represent the values of military medicine or the oath we take. I disown his actions. I disown his conduct. I disown him. The statement spread like shrapnel through the medical community. By Friday, the hospital board had authorized a comprehensive audit of his billing practices. The numbers emerged like bodies surfacing from dark water. $847,000 in phantom procedures. Surgeries that never happened. Patients charged for treatment they never received. Insurance companies defrauded across 15 states. Medical licenses in 4 states now flagged. The board's legal team was already speaking to federal prosecutors. The FBI was already reviewing the documentation. Dr. Mercer's career, the prestige, the reputation, the carefully constructed image of excellence, was collapsing in real time, dismantled by the very security clearance he'd tried to erase, accelerated by the video he'd starred in, weaponized by the patient he'd denied her the chance to save. 6 months later, Ashley stood in her new office at Seattle General. Not a small office. Not a closet or a supply room. The Director of Veteran Services. A position the hospital created specifically for her, with a mandate to build a comprehensive care program for every discharged soldier who walked through the doors. The title came with authority. The salary came with stability. Neither of those was why she took it. On her office wall hung a framed photograph. David in dress blues, arm around Master Sergeant Chen, both of them whole, both of them smiling. Both of them home. The caption read, "Home for good, our heroes." It was the first thing every veteran walking through that door saw. A reminder that healing wasn't something you did alone. That the people who'd held you together in the dark places would hold you together when you came back to the light. Across Atlanta, in a strip mall urgent care center in a part of town tourists never visited, a man in a maroon polo shirt with a name tag that read Steve was mopping floors at $15.27 an hour. He flinched when patients called him doctor. He'd stopped trying to correct them. The name tag was the only truth that stuck. Steve. Not Dr. Mercer. Not a surgeon. Not a healer. Just a man who'd gambled on the assumption that no one would ever know who he really was, and lost everything when someone found out. His medical licenses had been revoked. His credentials blacklisted. His name would never appear on a surgical schedule again. He mopped in silence, the smell of pine cleaner sharp and unforgiving, every stroke of the wet floor a rhythm that wouldn't stop for him, couldn't stop for him, because he wasn't anyone important enough to stop the world. Ashley was in Trauma Bay 3 when the call came in. A gunshot victim, unstable vitals, maybe 90 seconds before the window closed. She moved with the authority that came from surviving things that should have killed her, and the body memory of a soldier who'd saved lives when there was nothing but blood and morphine and prayer. The young resident looked at her once, then stepped back. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Out of recognition that the quiet nurse with the careful hands had always been carrying the weight of a captain, and now everyone could finally see it. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. All those months of silence. All those years of disappearing. All that strength poured into becoming invisible so that someone else's darkness wouldn't swallow her son's future. And now she didn't have to hold any of it back anymore. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd trained for exactly this. The bleeding slowed. The vitals stabilized. Sinus rhythm at 88. The resident watched her like she'd just shown him what a hero actually looked like. She finished her shift at 11:51 p.m., changed out of her scrubs in the locker room she'd almost been escorted out of, and walked to the parking lot where rain was still falling, gentle now, forgiving. Her son was waiting by the car. David pulled her into an embrace that said everything his voice wouldn't. Behind him, Master Sergeant Chen leaned against the hood, no longer in dress uniform but in jeans and a jacket with a Special Forces patch sewn into the lining, the same patch that had started everything. He nodded at her. Not salute. Not military protocol. Just one warrior acknowledging another warrior who'd finally come home. Subscribe to see more stories of hidden strength revealed. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real value. And tell us, would you have walked away, or would you have fought? The ones who have seen the worst often give the most.